Hello, this is Hunter McDermott with another video for Anyone Can Play Guitar. This is the third and final part of our discussion about modes. It is raining like crazy out there, so try to ignore the low-level rain splashing sound going on. So in the first part, we talked about what modes are. So it's important from a theoretical standpoint to understand how various, what a mode is. And we discussed how a major scale, which we're already familiar with, and also a natural minor scale are examples of modes. So we kind of, without realizing it, already knew a mode or two. We're certainly familiar with hearing those sounds. So the question then was, what are the other modes and how are they constructed? So we looked at how you can take a scale like C, for example, C major, and go, okay, well, if I start from C and end on C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, I've got a C Ionian mode. If I go from D to D, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, I've got D Dorian and E Phrygian and F Lydian and all that stuff, right? And that's cool. It's neat to kind of understand that within one group of notes, like C major, you've got a bunch of different modes if you start from each different scale degree. But then we also looked in the previous video, part 2, of how thinking that way kind of doesn't translate to something interesting sounding. So if I'm playing D minor, G major, C major chord progression, playing D Dorian, G Mixolydian, C Ionian, and thinking that way doesn't really help me all that much, right? Because they're all exactly the same. They're the same notes, and they sound the same over all three of those chords, even though you're technically, from a theoretical standpoint, playing 3 different modes. So in the previous video, as a prelude to this one, we looked at, or listened plenty to, what these modes sound like, divorced from any kind of chord progression or musical environment. We just played a drone, said, okay, here's a note, here's the root of our scale, and we played the scale, played the mode over top of it. And I hope that illustrated to you the unique qualities that these modes have and kind of helped to justify their existence. I don't want to talk them down too much by saying they all sound the same if you do it in this certain way, because they certainly have potential to be very interesting sounding and quite unique. So then that was all leading up to this video, which is how do we actually use them in kind of a practical way. Now, this is going to be somewhat subjective because I'm just picking chord progressions, and we'll explain a little bit about what the chord progression is doing. We'll kind of analyze it a little bit as the case dictates, but you can certainly apply these things over whatever you deem appropriate, right? So we'll kind of look at some rules, I guess, some guidelines to follow, scenarios that might make sense to use a certain mode over another one, and why. But you can certainly do whatever you want, as is the golden rule among all of my videos, right? We're learning how to kind of communicate to each other in a musical way, but don't let that ever dictate what you decide to play. If you hear something in your head that you like, then you should play it, and don't worry about what it is, or whether or not it's right. Okay, so without further ado, let's get onto the chord progression. So we're going to skip Ionian and Aeolian in this video. We're just going to talk about the other 5 modes because, again, Ionian is major, and that should be somewhat obvious how to use that from our previous videos. And then we had a video about the natural minor scale, aka the Aeolian Mode, and we looked at how you can do that as well. So here we're just going to focus on kind of the weirder ones, so to speak. Alright, so the first one, we're going to look at the chord progression, and we'll look at the scale and figure out what we can do there. Alright, so here is the chord progression we're going to do. We're going to start with G minor for 6 beats. Okay, and then we'll go to C9 or C7. C dominant 7 also would work there. And that's pretty much it. So we will repeat that. Just kind of create that little thing there. All right, and then the mode that we're going to be using for this is Dorian. And I want to show you why I came up with this. All right, so the first chord, so we have to do a little bit of analysis here to kind of understand what we're talking about. So the first chord is G minor. The notes of a G minor chord are G, B flat, and D. So first of all, it's a minor chord, it says right there. And as we discovered in the first and second videos about modes, there are sort of more major sounding modes and then more minor sounding modes. And then there's even one that's kind of got a mix of the two, which is the Mixolydian Mode, which we'll get to. So Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian would be considered minor modes. And the reason is because they all have a flat third in them. So that's this note right here. So when you see a minor chord, you can immediately kind of narrow it down to those four modes. Okay, one of those will work. But then we can look at the other notes in that particular chord, and that'll help us decide further, give us just more evidence for why that might work. So C9 has the notes, and I'm just going to kind of fill them in where they make sense here. So we have C, E, G, and B flat, and then the 9 is the D. All right, so we have this group of notes here, and the only thing we really know for sure is that we have a flat 3, and we don't have a flat 5, and we don't have a flat 6. Let's see here. Let me fill these in so it makes some sense. This is a flat 3. 5, 6, and then some kind of 7. All right, so here we're looking at comparing this group of notes that we have to the G major scale. Remember what we talked about in the first video, how in order to understand, the same way we determine what chord is a group of notes, what kind of chord that is, we have to compare it to its root scale. So we're thinking G major scale, and then I know in G major we don't have a B flat, we have a B. Therefore, if we have a B flat, then it's a flat third. All right. Okay, so we got this from so far. We can say definitively that we are not using the Aeolian mode, because the Aeolian mode has a flat 6, and here we have a regular 6. And if we're not doing Aeolian, then we're definitely not doing Phrygian with the flat 2, or Locrian with the flat 5. We can say that because those all include a flat 6. Alright, so if we don't have a flat 6, then we must only have a flat 3, and we can deduce that we also have a flat 7. So a flat 7 in the key of G would be F, because usually it's an F sharp. And then just to fill in the blank, because the second note is unaltered, that would be the second note of a G scale, which is A. All right. There's a lot of theory in there. I breezed through a whole bunch of stuff there. So take your time, go back and listen to the explanation. And again, make sure you're up on your theory from our first theory series and also the previous 2 modes videos. So in summary, I looked at the chord. I wrote out the notes of that chord. I looked at this chord, wrote out the notes of that chord, and started to see what scale degrees we already had accounted for. And then I'm thinking back to our modes and thinking, okay, well, we have a flat third, so that means we're doing one of the 4 minor modes. And what's the second, or what's the, which notes are flat in each mode? We have a flat 3, which tells us it's one of those 4. We don't have a flat 6, and that would be like the next minor mode. You have Dorian, which has 2 flats, Aeolian, which has 3, and so on and so forth. So if we only have a flat 3 and we don't have a flat 6, then this must be Dorian. And Dorian has both a flat 3 and a flat 7, and we just filled in the blanks from the G major scale. All right. So let's hear how that sounds. Let's create a little loop here of G minor to C9. I'm going to do G minor 7 just for fun. There's our little vamp going on. So here's our G Dorian scale. G, A, A flat, C, D, E, F, back to G. So just using our ear, we're thinking, okay, well, we see a G minor chord. It looks like we could play G Aeolian, G natural minor, but that E flat doesn't sound good. And the reason it doesn't sound good is because that E flat note directly clashes with the E natural that occurs in this C9 chord. So if you're playing a C9 chord which has an E note in it, an E natural, and then you play an E flat over top of it, it's not going to sound all that great because those notes are right next to each other and they're going to create some dissonance there. So there you go. Alright, and then another little note for this one here is taking a look at this group of notes. Just want to point this out. We have all naturals except for one flat. And which major scale do we know has only one flat? If we think back to our circle of fourths, the answer is F. And the chords G minor and C9 both occur in the key of F. So it's kind of like we're playing F major. But importantly, the chord progression has no F chords in it, right? We're not in the key of F because there isn't even an F chord there. So this is another case for why having this distinction of what a mode is and how it differs from the major scale is important. We're not playing in the key of F because we're not even hitting an F chord. We are instead starting with G minor. We have C9 and we're analyzing what those notes give us. And that gives us a unique sound, which is the Dorian sound. All right. If any of that explanation was unclear, we are going to do this for every single one. So we'll get more chances to clear it up for you. All right, the next chord progression we're going to do is going to utilize the Phrygian mode. So we're going to do A minor for 4 beats. We're going to go to B flat major 7. There we go. All right, then we come down to G minor, just plain old G minor for this one. And then we're going to finish with E minor 7, flat 5, otherwise known as E half diminished. So I'm using some 7th chords in these examples, so I want you to take a look back at the 7th chord video that I did to understand, how we got major 7 and major 7 flat 5, what those are. All right, so let's do the same thing. We're looking at the chords. The best place to start is the beginning of the chord progression. Just like any non-mode related thing, when we hear, the first thing that we hear kind of sets the tone for what we're expecting to come next. Doesn't mean that the piece of music has to adhere to that, but most of the time it does, just because that's kind of, it's a nice sound, right? We expect when we hear A minor something that we're hearing some sort of minor mode. All right, but let's look at the notes in the key of, or in the chord A minor. So we have A, C, and E. All right, B flat major 7. I'm going to fill in the blanks alphabetically here. So B flat, D, F, and A, which is right there. All right, and then the G minor, we have G, B flat, and D, so those are already accounted for. And then E minor 7 flat 5 is E, G, B flat, and D. So we've already accumulated all of our 7 notes for this scale. Just again, all we're doing is we're just analyzing what notes are in the chords that we're looking at. And we're starting with the first chord as our base. So we got A, C, E, and then we just kind of filled in the blanks, one of every letter there. All right, so now what we want to do is look at the key of A major, because that's the first note that we're dealing with here, and that'll give us the answer for what mode we're looking at here. So we have a 1. The second note of an A major scale is B, but here we have a B flat. So that means we have a flat 2. All right, and already this is a hint, because the Dorian mode and the Aeolian mode do not have a flat 2. So this has got to be either Phrygian or Locrian, because those are the only 2 modes that have a flat 2. All right, so the 3 is usually C sharp in the key of A, but here we have a flat 3, which is no surprise because both Phrygian and Locrian have a flat 3. D is the 4th note of A. Let's see, the 5th note is, wait, hang on. Yes, okay, so we have a 5 here. And then 6 is, well, so if we have a 5, a natural 5, that must mean that we're dealing with Phrygian, because a flat 2 means Phrygian or Locrian, but Locrian has a flat 5, and Phrygian has a natural 5. So by process of elimination, we're looking at the Phrygian mode, which means that we must have a flat 6, because in the key of A, we usually have F sharp. Here we have F, and then we also have a flat 7, because in the key of A, we have a G sharp, but here we have a G. All right, so this gives us the Phrygian mode. So over this chord progression, A Phrygian will work really great. Let's get that recorded here. See if I can do better with my time. So, again, the important thing here is looking at this group of notes, just like we did last time. If we look at this and we say, okay, well, it's all natural notes except one flat, and that's B flat. Well, hey, look at the circle of fourths. What major scale has one flat? F. But, just like in the last example, exactly like the last example, we're not playing an F chord, right? None of these chords are F chords. So we can't say that we're really in the key of F major because we're not even playing F major chords, right? We've given no indication that we're in the key of F, judging by the chord progression that we have. Instead, and more accurately, we are playing a Phrygian. So there you go. All right, let's get on to a less minor-y sounding thing here. So our next chord progression, moving right along, we're going to start with C minor 9 for 4 beats. Then we switch to F dominant 7. And then we move on to B flat major 7 again. Alright, and then that just repeats. So just 2 measures of that. And then we repeat the whole thing. Alright, now this one is a little bit different. So we're going to analyze this one a little bit different because we're going to be looking at the Lydian Mode, and this one is a little bit easier to use. It has few alterations in it. It's only got 1. So it can kind of be used in an interesting, slightly different way. So if we look at this, though, if we're looking at it following the same example that we started, the notes of a C minor 9 chord, since that's the first chord we see, are C, E flat, G, and B flat. Alright, and then F7 has an F, an A, a C, and an E flat. And then B flat major 7 has B flat, D, F, and A. Yeah. Alright, so if we're looking at this and trying to figure out what mode we're doing, let's compare this to the key of C. So C has a 1, has a 2. Usually in the key of C we have an E note. Here we have an E flat, so that's a flat 3, 4, a 5, a 6, and a flat 7. Alright, now if you're looking at this and you're going, okay, well we have a flat 3 and we have a flat 7, well that screams C Dorian over this. And you'd be right. But what we're going to do over this major 7 chord is we're going to play our Lydian scale. B flat Lydian. And I'll show you why that works okay. Do it up here. So B flat Lydian would be a B flat scale with a sharp 4. So normally in the key of B flat we have an E flat. Here we're just sharpening that 4 to make it an E natural. So that's our Lydian scale. Now the reason why this works is because if we look at the B flat major chord, the notes of that chord are B flat, D, F, and A. So it doesn't have any kind of E in it. In the sticking with what we've determined from the C minor here, we could play an E flat, but we could also get away with playing an E natural because over this chord we don't have any E notes at all, either flat or natural. So it really is kind of interchangeable, and this is where I think playing modally really starts to become like this is kind of how it's often done, which is we're not playing an entire tune in a mode. Not that you can't, like our previous 2 examples, those are just sticking with one mode the whole time. But in this case, we're making a conscious change to what mode we're playing over an individual chord in the middle of our chord progression. And it can create a more striking effect because your listeners kind of thinking they're going to hear one thing or continue to hear one thing, but then they hear something else. All right, so let's record this chord progression first of all. But anyway, so the reason why this... so by analyzing it, we determined that the Dorian scale would work over the entire thing, and you can absolutely do that, and that sounds cool. But it's perhaps slightly more predictable, right? You're hearing a sound over this C minor and over the F7, and then you just hear more of that same sound over the B flat 7. But by making that conscious choice to go, what if we tried Lydian over this? Then you're creating some melodic interest, right? You're creating a new sound, something that's a little bit less obvious, a little bit less expected, and can create a cool effect. So again, the Dorian scale works over the whole thing, but Lydian does not work over the whole thing because in the C Dorian scale we have an E flat, in the B flat Lydian scale we have an E flat and E. So the reason why that works over B flat major 7 is because that chord does not have an E in it at all. But C minor 9 has an E flat in it. F dominant 7, F-A-C, E flat, also has an E flat in it. So we're already hearing this E flat sound as part of those two chords. So if we try to play an E natural over those chords, it's going to clash with that E flat and sound kind of nasty. Alright, so there's your Lydian mode. So it's a slightly different example. It doesn't follow the same quite pattern as we saw before. Alright, this next one's pretty straightforward as far as they go. We're just going to do a vamp. Just going to play A7. Kind of a vaguely bluesy fashion. Because that is about the best I can do on my blues is vague. Alright, so that would be something like this. That's terrible, sorry. Close enough. Alright, so stop that for a second. So on this one, we only have one chord to analyze. And it is a dominant 7 chord. We have A, C, C sharp, E, and G. So we don't have a whole lot of information on this one, but we have enough. We have all that we really need. We have a 1. We don't know what kind of 2 we have. We have a 3. Right? In the key of A major, again, we have to go back to the root key to understand what we're looking at here. In the key of A major, we have a C sharp. So that means we don't have any kind of altered 3 on this one. So already we can tell that this is not Dorian, or Phrygian, or Aeolian, or Locrian, because those all have a flat 3. And we don't know about the 4, like, I don't know, could be Lydian. Could be major. I don't know. So far, we don't really know. We have a 5. E is the 5th note of an A scale. And then some kind of 6. And then 7. In the key of A, we would normally have a G sharp. But here we have a G natural. G natural, which is a flat 7. All right. So again, this is all that we really need for this to understand what this is. We have an unaltered 3rd, so that means it has to be either Ionian, Lydian, or Mixolydian. But then we have a flat 7. Well, that rules out both Ionian and Lydian because those have natural 7s in them. So the only mode that exists that has an unaltered 3rd, a natural 3, and a flat 7 is the Mixolydian mode. So we can fill in the blanks here because we know nothing else is altered. So A, B, C, D, E, we do have an F sharp, and then G. And that makes up our Mixolydian scale. So that's A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G natural. So it's a flat 7. And that, as we discovered by just analyzing what chord this is, A, C sharp, E, G, that's a dominant 7 chord. So anytime you have a dominant 7 chord, you can play that Mixolydian mode over top of it, and that's going to sound great. So here we go. scale in there as well. I won't go into that. But so that's something that if you're a blues player, blues rock or just straight blues or blues jazz, even jazz blues, Mixolydian is going to be a highly useful scale for you because you have lots of dominant chords, lots of tension there. The standard classic 12-bar blues form is all dominant 7 chords. So say you're playing a B-flat blues, first chord is B-flat, play a B-flat Mixolydian scale. Second chord is E-flat, play E-flat Mixolydian. Then later we have an F7, play F Mixolydian. Right, so you can play that same mode over the same mode with different root notes over the whole thing and get more of a bluesy sound. So if I play like a major over this, and I play a G sharp, it doesn't work. That's because that note is not in that chord. So we have to alter it, make it a G natural, and then boom, works great. It starts to work great. Alright, so not a whole lot more to say about that one. That one's pretty straightforward. Which brings us to our final example. So for this one, we're going to use the opening bars of a jazz standard called Stella by Starlight, just for fun. So E minor 7 flat 5, then it goes to A7 flat 9, so we got an alternate dominant chord there. Then we go to C minor 7, and then F7. It continues on from there, but we're just going to loop this for our example. Okay, so we're going to start the same. This one isn't going to work out quite as cleanly and nicely, but we'll try to justify what we come up with here for this one. So let's start this. We'll start with the same method that we've used for the other ones here. Let's look at the notes of the first chord and the chord progression. So we have an E minor 7 flat 5, which is E G. There we go. E G, B flat, D. Okay. So looking at this already, we have a big hint as to what we might be using. So we can kind of just stop there for a second and go, okay, well, looking at the chord, if we were to kind of fill in these numbers here, so the key of E has a G sharp in it, but in this case we have a G, therefore it's a flat third. We don't know about the 2 or the 4 yet. The key of E does have a B natural in it, but here we have a flat 5, a B flat. So that should send up alarm bells that this is going to be the Locrian mode, because that's the only mode that exists that has the flat 5. And then the D is normally a D sharp in the key of E, so this is a flat 7. Alright, well, so we have the flat 3, the flat 5, the flat 7. We don't know about the 2, the 4, or the 6, but our flat 5 has to be Locrian because it's our only mode that has a flat 5. And if it has a flat 5, then it must have a flat 6, which would be C, because the key of E has a C sharp, but here we're playing C natural. And then it would have a flat 2, so we'd have an F instead of an F sharp, which is what normally occurs. And then we'd have just a regular old A. That's a flat 2 there. So that's our Locrian mode there. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of this A7 flat 5. Right, if we looked at it as an A7 from our previous example, we could say, well, A Mixolydian would work there. But then what's this flat 9? The cool thing is we're playing a flat 9 from this E, so we're just going to kind of keep playing the Locrian mode over this chord. There are other things you could do over this that might speak to the chord a little bit more, but sticking with Locrian over both of these chords is going to sound fine for our purposes, to keep the conversation relatively simple. So the other thing, before we move on to the next 2 chords, the other reason why Locrian should pop up in your mind immediately when you look at this chord progression is because of the first chord, which is a minor 7 flat 5. So it's got the flat 5 right in the title, right? So that screams Locrian right there. But additionally, when we looked in our 7th chords video, and we built chords from each of the different notes of a major scale, the chord built from the 7th note of a major scale is E minor 7 flat 5. And then from our first modes video, we looked at building a mode, a scale from each scale degree of a C major scale. So we did like C major, C Ionian, D Dorian, E Phrygian, F Lydian, G Mixolydian, A Aeolian, and then B, our 7th note of the C major scale, was Locrian. So the 7th chord is minor 7 flat 5. The 7th mode is Locrian. It's got the flat 5, right? All three of those signal Locrian really works nicely here. All right, so then to analyze this next half here, let's go back up here and say, okay, we got a C, an E flat. These are the notes of the C minor 7 chord, G, and B flat. So the reason why we have to do this at all is because the second note of this C minor 7 chord is an E flat. So a mode built off of E natural is not going to jive well over a chord that has a flat note in it like this. Because again, similar to the other examples, we have an E and an E flat happening at the same time, which is going to create a kind of a dissonant sound. And then the F chord, we have F, A, C, already accounted for, and then E flat. So if we compare this to our C major scale, we have a 1, some kind of 2, not sure yet, a 3, a flat 3, because normally we have E natural, so a flat 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, and a flat 7. Alright, and then using the same logic as the Dorian mode example that we looked at, we do have a flat 3 and a flat 7, so we know it's one of our 4 minor-y sounding modes, but we don't have a flat 6, which would tell us that it's Aeolian, which means that we can, by process of elimination, assume that there is a D would work really nice here, and that what we're playing is the Dorian mode. That. Okay, alright. But let's record this chord progression here and just see how this works from a hearing standpoint. Okay, here's our Dorian mode. So, similar to the Lydian example, we're able to alternate between a couple of chords, a couple of modes on this one. And I hope I've explained thoroughly why one would work over one set and not over the other. So in this particular example, our C minor chord has an E flat note in it. So any kind of mode built from E natural is not going to work because that E note is going to clash with that E flat note. So once we got to this point, we had to start looking at another mode to play over that set of chords. This is kind of a glaring omission, I admit. We're not going to we're not going to talk about the intricacies of this chord right now, but you could hear that Locrian mode, really, it worked fine, right? Technically, there's a clash going on here. This chord has a C sharp, and we're playing a C, but it sounded fine, and we don't really need to overcomplicate it for this example to talk about Locrian. But the big takeaway is E minor 7 flat 5 has a flat 5 in it, and the mode that has a flat 5, the only one, is the Locrian mode, and then it also includes these other flat notes. Alright, so that is the complete example of all the different modes, with the exception of Ionian and Aeolian, because those we've already kind of covered, major scale and minor scale, respectively. And again, we are just kind of covering some of my own examples, things that I've come across or just made up because I thought they might sound good. So yeah, different modes are useful in different scenarios, and some are more prevalent than others. I don't personally, in the music that I play, run into the Phrygian mode all that often, but I hope I've given you an example that's useful for how that might work, when that might work. Mixolydian is used all the time, again, over blues, because the blues genre, the styles that make up the blues, are prevalent in rock and jazz and all kinds of other styles of music. So Mixolydian is big, Lydian is big, you hear that one frequently. Time you're looking for kind of a dreamlike quality, throw the Lydian in there. And it's also used frequently because it is so easy to use, right? We saw that even though we had a chord, we had a chord that didn't have a 4 in it, which is most of our common chords. So you can throw Lydian in over a major chord just about any time you want. It's going to not really clash with anything, but kind of create a little bit of interesting color. And then Dorian is also used frequently because, again, it has fewer alterations. So the common theme here is that the fewer notes that you change, the more common the mode tends to be, just because the whole purpose of modes, really, in this discussion in general, is to get you to hear different sounds, things that are a little less common, a little different than what you're used to hearing. You turn on top 40 radio, you're going to hear a lot of major scales and minor scales, and not a whole lot else. There are certain artists out there that are more sophisticated, if you want to say that, and might dig more into this kind of stuff, but for the most part, you're going to hear the kind of easy to like, easy to understand stuff more frequently, which makes this stuff even more powerful, because if you can kind of create that sense of expectation, like, oh, he's just playing in a major key, then you throw that Dorian or that Lydian sound in there, ooh, it's gonna make people's ears perk up. Like, that's something that I wasn't quite expecting. That's a little different, a little bit more interesting, that kind of thing. So I encourage you to try to come up with your own chord progressions to jam with these. Going back to the second video, I think the drone thing is huge. I really think that's a necessary step you should go through before you attempt to do more complicated chord progressions, just because I want you to really know the sound before you try to play it over to something else, over some sort of chord progression. You really need to understand what qualities each mode has, because then you can come from a more informed place as far as putting your chord progressions together. Like, I really like that Lydian sound. I want to put together a chord progression that allows me to use that mode, or, whatever. That kind of thing. Alright, so it's a very deep topic, and, I felt like I was covering a ton of theory stuff kind of quick. So as usual, the disclaimer is I didn't cover every last thing you'll ever need to know in this series of videos. There are other series and single videos for that stuff, so I encourage you to check out the major scale, the music theory for guitar kind of bass series, the music theory basics, and then look at the video on natural minor scale, look at the video on seventh chords, And really make sure you have that stuff solid, because I did breeze through a lot of things here, but I was trying to focus the discussion mostly on what was different, the mode stuff. And then, of course, watch the first part and second part if you haven't already, to get a broader overview of how we got to this point. But that's it for the modes discussion. So if you have any questions, leave them for me. And if you have any questions unrelated to modes that you want me to potentially do a video on, shoot me an email. Check out the Ask Me Questions video and for the email there, and check that out. Send me a message and I'll maybe do a video about it. But anyway, thank you for watching and sitting through this quite long video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.